Is Steven Spielberg a UFO truther? And is his new film, Disclosure Day, a key touchstone on where America currently stands with regard to our views of extraterrestrials? I recently saw Spielberg's new movie, Disclosure Day. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a riveting ride. But I was struck by not just the deep dive into UFO culture. Recently, that we call it the UAP for unidentified anonymous phenomena, as we'll discuss later for why we use that term. But I was also struck by the use of religion in the film. There's an ancillary character who has her own faith crisis. You have a nun explaining how we fit within the galaxy. And then there's a through line throughout the whole film of, the dignity and divinity of humanity. So I knew this film raises important questions, even if it doesn't satisfy a lot of film critics. It's not going to be, I think, high up in the echelon of the Spielberg canon. But I wanted to do a video on it because I think it raises important questions. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert in UFO or UAP world, but I knew someone who was. Or is, I should say. Dr. Matthew Bowman, currently the Howard W. Hunter Chair of Mormon Studies at Claremont Graduate University, is not just one of the brightest and most respected scholars of American religious history. I'm, president of his fan club. But he's also someone who has spent a lot of time understanding the UFO culture. And he even wrote an essay on Disclosure Day that you can find at Slate. I'll link to it in the video description, in which he argues to understand Disclosure Day, you have to understand high strangeness. And that's just one of many UFO culture, UAP ideas that filter into this movie. You're probably aware of Dr. Bowman, thanks to his wonderful, groundbreaking work in the Mormon history world, his great book, The Mormon People, his edited volumes on a number of topics. He's authored many other books, but he's also author of a wonderful book that I strongly recommend, The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, which uses the first prominent abduction of Americans by aliens to understand conceptions of civil rights and race and society and backlash against the government and distrust of the American experiment altogether. And thankfully for me, Dr. Bowman agreed to talk with me. So instead of doing a lot of buildup, I'm going to cut directly to the interview because I think he has a lot of important things to say, not just about Disclosure Day, not just about Spielberg, but about why UFOs are such a point of fascination for Americans and why we can learn a lot about society by looking at these many cultural depictions and investigations. So without further ado, let's get to the interview with Dr. Bowman. I'm now pleased to be joined by the wonderful scholar, Dr. Matthew Bowman. Now, Dr. Bowman, you are probably best known to my viewers as the leading scholar in Mormon studies, but you've also established yourself as one of the most brilliant and approachable explainers of the UTA community. So maybe we could start by you explaining how you became interested in this topic, which then, of course, culminated in your recent and excellent book, The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill.
Yeah, thanks for that. Really, I think it is because of my interest in 20th century American religious history, and particularly kind of questions, well, the real question at the heart of religious studies generally, which is what is religion, right? And what do we think of when we think of religion, and why do we define that term in the ways that we do, and why do we include the things that we do in it and the things we exclude from it? And I was very interested in thinking about that in the context of the Cold War and the context of the emergence of alternative authorities in American life, particularly science, the academy, this whole kind of conglomeration of things that we call modernity generally. And it seemed to me that UFOs or UAP or whatever you want to call them, right? These days, those in the know say UAP for identified anomalous phenomena, because sometimes these things are underwater as well as in the sky. So we don't want to say flying anymore, but I'm going to say UFO because that's the term everybody knows. Anyhow, it seemed to me that these things were and really are, I think, perhaps the most fascinating disruptor of the categories that we invent. That is, are they a scientific problem? Are they a religious problem? Are they a problem of the mind, of psychology, which is another kind of authoritative language that we use in the 20th century, right? And one of the, I think, great fascinating things about them, if you're a scholar, is that they defy all of those categories, right? Believers in them sometimes say, well, some of them will say it's a scientific problem, others will say it's a religious problem, right? And then they'll have fights among themselves about all of this, right? Which, if you're a scholar of religion, right, this is just kind of golden stuff, and that's why I think more and more religious studies scholars like Hugh Urban, Diana Pasulka, famously, Jeffrey Kripal, right? These people are really looking at this topic in much, I think, more kind of theoretically sophisticated ways than I am. I am at heart kind of still a historian, although I dabble in this kind of other stuff. And that's, the abduction book is very much kind of a work of history, but it does, I think, try to use the Betty and Barney Hill case, this first abduction narrative in American history, as a way to think about how all of these different modes of authority came into being in the 1960s, and how they all begin to more or less argue with each other about who should really be in charge of how we think about what it means to be modern in 20th century America.
Yeah, well put. And I strongly recommend people checking out the book because it's so fascinating how these themes interweave with civil rights and race and the Vietnam War and whether we can trust society and whether America's fragmenting apart. And like the UFO story is so central to many of these through lines. And it's also just interesting. And it's that interest that drives so much of the American fascination. So maybe as a too simple question, but like, why are Americans so fascinated with UFOs? And what does that fascination tell us about American culture?
There's a really great recent book by the historian Greg Gagigian. And it is actually, the subtitle of the book is A Global History of the UFO Phenomenon. And he does, I think, tie together the stuff that's happening in Russia and Asia and Europe. Over this narrative of the mid 20th century, from 1947, when these things really get going. But even he will say in that book, there is something kind of distinctively American about it. The first stories that really capture the global interest are American stories. Beginning in 1947 and then moving on, and although other cultures and other nations embrace them as well, and you see other societies kind of generating their own narratives around them. It's the kind of American UFO community that is the heart of this. And there is something I think really interesting happening there. And it does, I think, have to do with what you just said, right? Which is to say, when there is in the early Cold War, and a number of scholars have written about this, I think most famously Paul Boyer, there is this kind of deep fascination and trust in science after the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb, but also a real terror of science as well, a real sense of like this thing that we have created helped this country become the dominant nation on earth, but it also might destroy all of us at any moment. And that means, right, that science becomes kind of this really powerful, fascinating, but also repulsive language and authority for talking about things like this. That combined, I think, with the emerging phenomenon of psychology and what blossomed in the late 20th, early 21st century in this kind of like culture of therapy, right? And this kind of mode by which we use this language in popular culture and everyday life to explain what we are doing to ourselves and to other people, right? This blend of all of these kind of authoritative languages, I think, finds in the UFO this sort of nub. This way that we can talk about this strange thing. And this strange thing, precisely because it is unidentified, because it is strange, because it cannot be explained, it becomes a piece of paper on which we can write all of these different stories of authority, right? We can talk about science through the UFO. We can talk about the military through the UFO. We can even, as I try to do in the Betty and Barney Hill book, and as other scholars have done, and we can even talk about race in terms of the UFO, right? It becomes this kind of blank canvas for all of the other anxieties we want to work out.
Yeah, the truth is out there.
That's what they say.
So we'll get to Disclosure Day in a minute, but I want you to talk about Steven Spielberg and his overall corpus, because this is far from the first time that he's broached this topic, whether it be E.T., whether it be Close Encounters, whether it be Indiana Jones and the Golden Crystal Skull. That, like, what is it
Maybe at
about?
least successfully in Crystal Skull.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
one's not very
less
good.
successful. Why does Spielberg's keep dipping back into that well?
I think two reasons. One is I think he grew up at the same time this phenomenon, right? He is born about 8 months before the Kenneth Arnold sighting, which is the first sighting of weird things in the sky that is labeled a flying saucer. And that the story of that sighting kind of triggers everybody else to start labeling the things they see in the sky flying saucers. Spielberg is only a few months old when that happens. His life has been kind of coterminous with this phenomenon. And the easy answer is, I think, in one level, he's a believer. And he will say that frankly, right? He thinks that we are being visited by intelligences that are not human. Whether they might be, well, he speculated they might be people from the future. He speculated they might be extraterrestrials from another planet, all of that. But I think on top of that, I mentioned a moment ago how these things have been kind of this source of anxiety and maybe solutions for anxiety. They've been a way for us to work out in our culture, all these things we have issues with. And Spielberg, I think, is part of that. Although he's a real optimist, I think Spielberg sees in these things, whatever they are, maybe a problem, but also a solution. They offer us maybe a way we can fix all of the tensions in our society. We can answer all the questions that we have. And you see this, I think, in almost all of his movies, right? These UFOs can be terrifying and destructive. But in the end, whether it be E.T. or Close Encounters or whatnot, there's also a kind of a resolution and a healing that things bring. That actually puts them kind of on one side of a real divide in the community of believers here. Some of them are, just terrified and are certain these things are out to get us. Others, though, do have the same sort of hope. And actually, those in the latter camp tend to be what we might call religious believers, right? UFO religionists, people who look to these things as some sort of higher power that wishes us well. Spielberg, I don't think is anything, like, as committed as like the Urantia movement or anybody like that, right? But there is a real kind of mystical and almost religious bent to how he thinks about them and treats them.
Yeah, there's a sense to where he believes humanity is enabled by these encounters rather than threatened. And in fact, all the dangers in these movies is often humanity rather than the extraterrestrials.
Exactly.
So that brings us to Disclosure Day. And you've written a really smart piece in Slate that I'll link to in the video description, where you argue that to really capture all the messages in Disclosure Day, you have to be really deep into the UAP community. So can you give some examples of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I say that because it just seemed to me from the actually, even from when the trailers dropped in December, that this is evidence that Spielberg himself is really deep into this community. I mean, on the most kind of superficial level, there's a lot of little nods in the vocabulary and the language. Spielberg names a minor character in the movie, Nathan Twining. And Nathan Twining, for those in the know, was an Air Force officer who signed off on one of the very first investigations of flying saucers in 1947. Spielberg uses the term experiencers, which is the kind of preferred nomenclature for people who say they have had encounters with non-human intelligence, that sort of thing as well. But also, I think all those kind of little, what we might call Easter eggs aside, right? There's a lot kind of philosophy in this film about these things too. And really at the heart of this is this, from people who are really deep into the UFO community now, most of them, although I'd say probably a plurality at least, and maybe even a small majority, don't actually believe that these things are spaceships from another planet. that were built on Venus or on Zeta Reticuli or wherever and flown here the way we build spaceships. Rather, they will say these things exist at a different level of reality than we do. And we get into kind of questions of ontology and questions of mysticism pretty quick. And the conversations then start becoming very much like conversations that Christian theologians have about the nature of the Trinity, right? What's the nature of being? What do these things reveal to us about our fundamental existence as human beings, right? What do they reveal to us about the untapped powers of the human mind? And many of these experiencers start describing not simply, like I was kidnapped by these things, the way that, human beings might throw you in the back of a truck and drive you somewhere. They instead start talking about strange telepathic experiences, about experiencing kind of transcendent ecstasy, about about having their purpose in life revealed, the future of humanity revealed to them, right? The promise that we are about to ascend to higher levels of being, right? And that is what the famous UFO researcher Alan Hynek called high strangeness. This kind of weird mystical experiences that are associated with seeing these things. And that kind of thing suffuses Steven Spielberg's UFO movies. And particularly, I think more than almost any other, Disclosure Day is a deeply, deeply weird movie. It is a weird movie because it has so much of this kind of mythos baked into it. It is not what people who think Steven Spielberg made a fun UFO movie think they're getting into when they go into this. There's so much lore, so much mythology, and so much, again, as I said earlier, the kind of hope for human transcendence baked into this movie. I'm frankly kind of shocked that a major studio released it.
So do you think he really believes in all of this, or is he using this as a useful mechanism to tell a broader story about humanity?
I think much of the strange psychic powers, the telepathy, the invisibility in the movie, the cloaking that aliens are sort of revealed themselves to us in forms that our small human minds cannot perceive. So they are cloaked in forms that we can accept, which again is very much like how, Christians will talk about angels and such like. I don't know that he believes every bit of that lore. But I do think, and I think it because he has said it, I do think he believes that there is a benevolent intelligence elsewhere in the universe that is reaching out to us through these strange experiences. We don't quite understand it, but if we were able to wrap our heads around it, it would help us as a human species solve our problems.
How is the UFO community responding to the movie? Have you been following those discussions? Do they
Yes.
think that you're sharing our dirty laundry, or you're exposing the good
Well,
ideas? Are we preparing the world for the truth to come? How are they reacting?
two things. First, before it came out, you saw two major camps. One was a group of people, and including some very, very prominent voices in the UFO community. I cite in the article Ross Coulthart and Jeremy Corbell, who are two of the kind of leading journalists covering this thing from a believer's point of view. They both expressed real optimism about it. They said, Spielberg actually, he understands us. He understands the problem. He is going to use this movie to do what some members of the community call, quote unquote, soft disclosure, which is to say, kind of prepare all of the normies in the world for the truth that is coming, right? This movie will be kind of an on-ramp for a lot of people. On the other hand, though, before the movie came out, you had a lot of other members of the community say, and this is quite common in the community as well, that Spielberg himself is compromised, that he is actually sowing misinformation. He is misleading us. There was a debate about whether or not he was consciously an agent of the shadowy forces that have hid the truth from us for so long, or if he was merely being duped by them. I will say this, though, since the movie has come out, I think many UFO folks have been softly kind of negative about it. which is to say, I think, although they will tell you much of what's in the movie he got right, he is accurately depicting the experiences of contact. He is accurately depicting a lot of the high strangeness, but I think they are somewhat a little more disappointed that Spielberg did not do more in the movie to expose the conspiracies, the cover
Mm.
up, the powers that be that are concealing the truth of all of this to us. There's a bit of disappointment that he did not go farther than he did.
Yeah, fascinating. So, of course, as you've kind of hinted at throughout this discussion, there's a lot of overlap with religion too. And religion definitely shows up in Disclosure Day, either in the explicit version of the girlfriend, the former nun, who sees it as a threat to her religion until her other nun friend tells her that it's okay. But there's also a sense of the divinity of the humanity that underwrites much of the story. So how does religion and UAP kind of fit together in this movie in general, and how does that reflect the broader contours of religion and UFO culture?
Yeah, that's so great, right? There actually has been a real long conversation, particularly in American Christianity, about um, the place of the flying saucers, UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence. And in fact, actually, most major Christian groups, both in the United States and in the world, have not actually been inherently terrified of the idea. Of course, you have C.S. Lewis writing essentially novels about aliens way back in the 40s and 50s, right? He writes a whole trilogy called the Space Trilogy, which deals with this problem and kind of has extraterrestrial characters in it and talks about how Christianity can assimilate this. The Vatican and Roman Catholics have also been generally, as the movie depicts, not opposed to the idea, right? And say this fits in very well with how we kind of imagine the nature of the universe to be. And this goes much further back than we might think, right? All the way back in the 18th century, people like John Adams, and as you know, the kind of Christian writer Thomas Dick is writing about extraterrestrial intelligence is pretty matter of factly and saying this makes a lot of sense, right? This is not an unnerving thing. The one exception to that, I think, is some contemporary evangelical Christians who, as in the 40s and 50s, tended to view these things with suspicion, to worry that they were demons, and some of that persists. In fact, J.D. Vance said this about 2-3 months ago. He said, I worry that these things are actually demonic, which is language actually that evangelicals have been using for 50 or 60 years. And among in the UFO community, there is a fair amount of suspicion that there are conservative evangelicals in the Pentagon that are suppressing knowledge of these things because they think they are demonic, right? So there is this kind of real wide spectrum of how American Christians have thought about this question. But to your other point as well, right? I mean, a lot of scholars have observed, and I would, some of my own work, I'm grappling with the same problem, right? That these things really stretch the boundaries of what we think religion is, or is not, or can be. A really kind of fascinating example of this, right, in Scientology. And I initially actually thought I might write about Scientology because I think Scientology is a real kind of place where these issues are really being grappled with. And Scientology actually quite consciously pursues the category of religion as Americans imagine what it is, right? They do this really blatantly. They want to be considered a religion. So they begin putting crosses on things and they apply for religious status with the IRS and so on and so forth. And it's really easy to kind of say, well, look at them. They're kind of faking it. But on a deeper level, it's like, are they though? Right? If this is how Americans define what religion is, then why are they doing it incorrectly? Right? And just because they have deep in their mythos this kind of fascination with science and UFOs, there's a lot of other groups as well. I mentioned earlier, Unarius, which is a UFO group, that they are very explicit in saying we do not consider ourselves a religion. We do not think we are a religion, but they believe that extraterrestrials are coming to Earth to save all of us, and that we have to kind of follow the teachings of extraterrestrials. And if we do that, we will ascend to kind of higher planes and higher powers. It sounds a lot like how traditional religions work, right? I think I would recommend anybody Diana Pasulka's work on this. She grapples, I think, with these problems in a really fascinating way.
Very fascinating. So Is the UAP community having a moment right now? It seems like there's a lot of convergence. There's the things that have been released. There has been Obama saying something about it. There have been new documentations, and of course now this movie. And if they are having a moment right now, what does that tell us about where our society, what our society is currently grappling with?
Yeah, the term that UFO people use is flaps. So there was a flap in the late 40s and early 50s. There was another flap in the late 60s. And I think in some ways, now that term is often reserved for like a period in which there's a ton of sightings and a ton of kind of new encounters. But in a lot of ways, I think the last 9 years have been a flap. And I'm saying 9 years in particular because the real watershed moment is in December 2017 when the New York Times publishes an article on the front page um, revealing that for many years the Pentagon had a center. It depends on what you call it. It actually is called different things at different times, but had, at the behest of Harry Reid, who allocated the money for it, a center for the investigation of strange things in the sky. And this center collected a lot of video. The New York Times posted some of that video. That video is, as of yet, kind of unexplained. It's objects moving very weirdly in the sky. And since then, there have been a series of whistleblowers, people who have said they've worked with or adjacent to that center, who have come out and said kind of remarkable things about how the U.S. military has cracked. One whistleblower, a guy named David Grush, said that the U.S. military has non-human biologics, is the term he used, and so on and so forth, right? So there really is, I think the UFO community is really kind of whipped into high steam at this point. There's a lot of excitement and a lot of kind of, I think, frustration because for 9 years now, there's been an expectation that things are going to crack open at any moment. We're going to learn the truth at any moment. And as always seems to happen, it's always, that moment is 3 months away. It's 6 months away. It's next year. That this just keeps happening, right? But it is, I think, really reflective of this kind of state we've been in for 50 years now of deep distrust in institutions in American society, right? We don't trust any institutions anymore. We have a real sense that most institutions are corrupt. They're doing bad things to us. They're lying to us. And there's also, I think, combined with that, this real kind of interesting hunger for kind of transcendence, for truth, for something that will change everything. Right. And those things converge, I think, really fascinatingly in the contemporary UFO movement.
So fascinating. Well, Dr. Bowman, it's almost like the waiting for this big disclosure is just like the second coming. It's always just around the corner and it's going to be there in a moment. Thank you so much.
Parallel.
Yeah, thanks so much for walking us through these fascinating materials and explaining why we're in the middle of this flap.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Dr. Bowman for walking this novice through that world. I hope you found it as useful as I did. Again, I strongly recommend his book, The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, if you want to see more evidence of why these stories, whether you believe in them or not, I myself am a skeptic, but you probably would have guessed that, that these stories mean a lot in American culture. And maybe if you haven't done so yet, go watch Disclosure Day and soak in that symbolism and those ideas. And you yourself can come to the conclusion of, is Spielberg making an argument or preparing, doing a soft disclosure? I thought not to do a spoiler of the movie. I think we've succeeded in giving spoilers throughout this discussion. But the big disclosure in the movie doesn't really work as a cinematic tool, as many critics have highlighted, but I do think it works as a religious awakening, which is, again, another key element of how spirituality interweaves into this story. It's not just about aliens, it's about the human soul and solving or redeeming American society. I hope you found this discussion interesting. If so, please hit the like button, share with others, subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet. I try to do connections of religion and politics and modern culture 3 times a week. And if you like to geek out about stuff, this is the place for you. So make sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you want to get back to the channel, you can become a member where you get early access to the videos, you get little icons next to your name, and most importantly, you can feel good about supporting public-facing religious scholarship, which is what I aim to do, even on things that might sound silly to some, extraterrestrials, because it's something that's taken very seriously by many, including Steven Spielberg. So once again, this is a reminder of why history has never been more relevant than the present, because it makes sense of these obsessions, these fascinations, these interests, these cinematic experiences that tell us a lot about American society and what we yearn for.